Welcome, my dear Alchemicjoker family. A powerful message awaits us today. Dive in and God bless.
Wait, don't answer yet. Just look around the room in your head. Feel that shift? That sudden tightening in the air? That moment when half the people stopped breathing because something about you didn't fit the script they memorized? Good. That's where this starts. Because the panic didn't come from noise. It didn't come from force. It came from recognition. They saw you do something they couldn't name. They heard you say something that didn't come from books, didn't come from mentors, didn't come from polite society's little training manuals. And the first thought that ripped through their minds wasn't admiration. It was fear. Wait, who taught you this? That question isn't curiosity, it's an alarm. You need to understand something right now. People only ask that when they realize you're operating from a place they don't have access to. When your instincts move faster than their rules. When your calm doesn't come from safety, but from familiarity with chaos. See, most of them were trained in the light. They learned how to behave when conditions are clean. When approval is guaranteed, when outcomes are predictable. You were educated in the dark. Pain was your instructor. Silence was your classroom. Betrayal was the exam you passed without studying. That's why when pressure hits, you don't fracture. You clarify. They're panicking because they can't trace your source. There's no lineage they can mock, no mentor they can discredit. No system they can point at and say, that's where it came from. You didn't inherit this, you forged it. And that terrifies people who survive by imitation. You carry that dangerous duality they can't resolve. You look controlled, but there's violence in your restraint. You sound reasonable, but there's fire behind every pause. You move like a saint, but think like a psychopath who learned mercy the hard way. Angel and demon, not at war inside you, but aligned. That's the part they don't teach. That's the part that doesn't come with certificates. They sense it when you speak. Your words don't beg, they don't posture, they land. And suddenly the room splits, half leaning in, half pulling back, half inspired, half scrambling to protect whatever fragile hierarchy they were standing on. Because you're unpredictable in the most threatening way possible. Not erratic, unreadable. Unpredictability isn't chaos when it's disciplined. It's leverage. It's the ability to step outside expectation and make everyone else react while you remain still. They can't model you. They can't simulate you. Every time they think they've figured you out, you switch gears without changing speed. That kind of power only comes from pain that didn't kill you. You learned when no one was watching. You adapted when no one was helping. You sharpened instincts in moments where hesitation would have ended you. So when they ask, who taught you this? What they're really asking is, why didn't this break you like it broke us? And the answer makes them sick. Because you didn't become this by being protected. You became this by being tested. You didn't get softer. You got precise. You didn't lose empathy. You just stopped wasting it on people who confuse kindness with weakness. You didn't abandon the light. You just learned how to carry it through hell without flinching. That's why your presence rewires rooms. You don't need to dominate. You don't need to raise your voice. Your calm alone tells a story they don't want to hear, that you've already been through the worst-case scenario and survived with awareness intact. They feel exposed around you because masks slip when real experience walks in. Half the room panics because you remind them of something they buried, the version of themselves that could have evolved if they hadn't chosen comfort over truth. The other half watches in silence because on some level they know whatever shaped you wasn't pretty, but it was effective. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They're afraid you didn't learn this from someone. They're afraid you remembered it, like it was always in you, like the pain didn't create you. It unlocked you. So let them panic, let them whisper, let them look for a teacher, a source, a reason that makes you safe to understand. You don't owe them an explanation. You are what happens when pressure meets awareness, when darkness is studied instead of denied, when survival evolves into mastery. And the next time that question echoes, "Wait, who taught you this?" just smile internally, because the truth would destroy the room completely. No one taught you. You became this when you realized breaking wasn't an option, and unpredictability was the only honest response to a world that never played fair. And here's the part they really don't want to sit with, the part where the panic deepens instead of fading. Because once that question is asked, once the room fractures and the energy shifts, it never goes back to normal. They can feel it. Something irreversible just happened. A line was crossed, not by aggression, but by presence. They're realizing you don't react the way a normal person should. When tension rises, most people scramble for approval or retreat into silence. You don't. You slow down, your eyes sharpen, your words get fewer, heavier. You're not overwhelmed, you're activated. And that flips a switch in their nervous system they don't understand. They were taught to fear confrontation. You were trained by it. They were conditioned to avoid discomfort. You learned to read it like a language. That's why they can't tell if you're about to save the room or burn it down. And that uncertainty is poison to people who survive on predictability. See, they grew up believing morality was simple. Good people do this, bad people do that. Light stays clean, dark stays hidden. Then you walked in, composed, articulate, grounded, carrying both without apology. You didn't choose a side, you integrated them. That's when the saint-psychopath paradox hits them hardest. Because you don't look cruel, yet you're not afraid to be. You don't look broken, yet you've clearly been shattered before. You don't look angry, yet there's a lethal calm in how you assess everything. They can sense it. You know exactly how far things can go because you've already been there. You've stared at outcomes they only theorize about in safe conversations. You've lived inside consequences, not fantasies. And that's why their bodies react before their minds catch up. Heart rates spike. Breathing shortens, eyes dark. Half the room panics not because you're loud, but because you're quiet at the wrong moments. Silence is terrifying when it's controlled. They start replaying interactions with you, looking for tells. They search your tone, your posture, your pauses, trying to reverse engineer you. And every attempt fails, because your behavior isn't performative, it's instinctual. You're not following a script. You're responding to reality as it is, not as it's supposed to be. That's when the second realization hits them. You're not impressed by status. You're not intimidated by authority. You're not distracted by surface-level charm. Those things only work on people who haven't lost much. You've already paid the price, which means you're no longer negotiable. They can't leverage you with fear, because fear taught you. They can't manipulate you with praise, because you've survived without it. They can't corner you with threats, because you've already adapted to worst-case scenarios. So they panic, because people who can't be moved move everything else. You've become a mirror they didn't consent to look into. Standing near you forces them to confront their own softness, their own avoidance, their own untested beliefs. And that's unbearable for people who built didn't just learn how to survive pain. You learned how to extract intelligence from it. Every loss refined you. Every betrayal sharpened your perception. Every silent night trained your nervous system to stay awake while others shut down. That's why when chaos enters the room, you don't escalate, you calculate. They mistake that for coldness. It's actually mercy. Because you know exactly how destructive you could be if you stopped caring. That's the demon they sense. Not unleashed, but disciplined. Chained not by fear, but by choice. And nothing scares people more than power that restrains itself voluntarily. They're used to monsters who snarl. You're worse, you think, and the angel side of you. That's what confuses them most. Because despite everything, you still see clearly. You still understand nuance. You still recognize suffering in others, even when you refuse to be consumed by it. You're not numb. You're selective. You don't waste compassion on people who weaponize it. You don't extend trust to those who haven't earned proximity. You don't explain yourself to anyone who hasn't walked your terrain. That's not arrogance, that's evolution. So when the room fractures and that question hangs in the air, wait, who taught you this? Understand this. They're witnessing the aftermath of pressure done right, of a mind that didn't collapse under contradiction, but fused it into something lethal and lucid. You are the result of lessons no one volunteers for. You are what happens when survival upgrades into strategy. You are living proof that pain, when metabolized properly, becomes authority. Let them panic. Let them whisper. Let them look for your origin story so they can box you into something manageable. They won't find it. Because you weren't trained to perform. You were forged to end cycles. And once people sense that, the room is never calm again. And here's where it goes deeper, darker, quieter. Because after the panic, after the whispers, after they fail to categorize you, something more unsettling takes over the room. Awareness. They start realizing you're not reacting to them. You're watching them. Not in a paranoid way, in a surgical way. You clock micro-expressions. You feel energy shifts before words move. You notice who stiffens when you speak, who avoids your eyes, who suddenly over-explains. You're not hunting, you're mapping. That's when the power dynamic truly flips. Because most people believe observation is passive. They don't understand that being seen, truly seen, is invasive. You learned this early, when you had to read rooms to survive, when moods mattered more than words, when silence was louder than threats. You learned how to sense danger without drama, intention without confession. That's not talent, that's adaptation. And now, that adaptation walks into rooms before you do. They start editing themselves around you. They speak differently. They posture less. They hesitate before lying. Half the room panics because they feel naked. The other half panics because they realize you could dismantle them without raising your voice. And you're choosing not to. That choice is unbearable to witness because restraint implies capability. You see, people are comfortable with obvious threats, loud anger, messy egos, predictable villains. What they can't stand is quiet capability. Someone who could disrupt everything, but doesn't need to prove it. That's you. You don't flex. You don't posture. You let others reveal themselves. That's why they ask again and again in different forms, who taught you this? They're begging for a narrative that makes you less dangerous. Because if this was taught, it can be unlearned. If it was inherited, it can be dismissed. If it came from trauma, it can be pitied. But if it came from integration, From a mind that survived contradiction and became sharper because of it, then you're not broken, you're upgraded, and that terrifies them. Because you represent a version of evolution that doesn't need permission. You didn't choose between kindness and strength. You didn't choose between empathy and control. You didn't choose between light and dark. You stacked them. That's why your presence destabilizes fragile systems. Systems rely on predictability, on people staying in their assigned emotional lanes. You don't. You move fluidly. Calm when chaos is expected, silent when reactions are demanded, direct when avoidance is safer. You violate expectation without breaking composure. That's dominance without aggression. They feel it when you don't rush to explain yourself, when you let misunderstandings breathe, when you don't correct people immediately. That patience isn't insecurity, it's confidence that truth will surface on its own, because it always does. You've watched it happen too many times. You've seen liars collapse under the weight of their own stories. You've seen manipulators overplay their hand. You've seen golden reputations rot when pressure lasted longer than their mask. That's why when someone powerful stumbles in front of you, when the room feels that shift, you don't celebrate, you don't gloat, you don't flinch. You've seen this movie before. And that's when the panic becomes personal. Because they're realizing you didn't just learn how to survive chaos. You learned how to outlast narratives. You don't attach to roles. You don't cling to identity labels. You let people show you who they are over time, and you adjust accordingly. Time is your weapon. Patience is your camouflage. Silence is your pressure. They mistake your stillness for passivity until they realize outcomes keep bending around you. That's the demon they can't control. Not rage, not cruelty, but clarity. And the angel? That's the part of you that refuses to become small just to make others comfortable. That part that still believes in precision over destruction. That part that chooses restraint not because you're afraid, but because you understand consequences. You don't need to burn the room down. Just standing there, fully integrated, is enough. So when the energy spikes, when half the room panics, and the other half goes quiet, when someone finally blurts out that question again, wait, who taught you this? Understand what's really happening. They're not asking about your past. They're afraid of your future. They're sensing that whatever you are now is only a phase, a controlled one, that something sharper is waiting behind it, something even calmer, even more decisive, even less interested in approval. And they don't know if they'll survive the version of you that stops explaining. You do. That's why you don't rush. That's why you don't react. That's why you let the panic breathe. Because you already know the truth they're dancing around. You weren't taught this to fit in. You were forged like this to change the temperature of every room you enter, without ever raising your voice. And once people feel that, they never forget you. And here's where it ends. Not with noise, not with theatrics, but with something far more unsettling. Acceptance. You don't correct them anymore. You don't soften yourself. You don't rush to make the room comfortable again. You let the panic sit. Because you understand something they're just beginning to feel. Once awareness enters a space, it doesn't leave quietly. It rewires behavior. It exposes cracks. It forces choices. They'll either grow or avoid you forever. And you're fine with both. You've stopped needing to be understood. You've stopped explaining your depth to people who only swim in the shallow end. You've stopped shrinking the parts of you that were carved by fire. That question, wait, who taught you this? Fades into silence, replaced by something heavier: respect, distance, caution. Because now they know. You're not dangerous because you're loud. You're dangerous because you're awake. You carry light without innocence, darkness without chaos, power without desperation, and the room will never forget the moment it realized you weren't reacting to the game. You were operating above it. That's why you walk away unchanged. That's why they're still shaken, and that's why, deep down, they know. Whatever made you like this wasn't an accident. It was necessary, and it's finished teaching you now. No, it's not finished yet. That's the part they keep misunderstanding. They think this is the final form because the room quieted, because the panic settled into caution, because people stopped asking questions out loud and started asking them in private. They mistake stillness for completion. But you know better. You know this phase, this calm, watchful, controlled version of you is just the threshold, the moment right before momentum compounds, the inhale before something irreversible. Because awareness doesn't plateau, it sharpens. What they felt wasn't the full weight of you, it was the preview, a signal flare. Enough to destabilize the room, not enough to collapse it. And you did that without trying, without force, without strategy, without revealing anything you didn't intend to. That's why the silence afterward feels heavier than the panic before it. They go home replaying moments, your pauses, your timing, the way you didn't rush to speak when everyone expected you to. The way you let others talk themselves into corners. The way you stayed emotionally neutral while outcomes tilted in your favor. They can't sleep comfortably after that. Because once someone like you enters their awareness, they start questioning the foundation they've been standing on. They wonder how many people like you exist. How many learned in the dark instead of the spotlight. How many are quiet not because they're weak, but because they're deciding, and you feel it too. You feel the shift in yourself. You're no longer trying to prove resilience. You're no longer fueled by survival. You're no longer reactive to disrespect or doubt. Those were earlier lessons. Now you're operating from discernment. You choose when to engage. You choose when to remain silent. You choose which battles are beneath you and which ones are worth rewriting entire trajectories for. That's evolution through pain, not turning bitter, not turning cruel, but turning precise. You see how easily rooms fall apart when certainty walks in quietly. How fragile bravado becomes when it's no longer being mirrored back. How quickly people reveal fear when someone stops playing emotional ping pong with them. You're not here to dominate spaces. You're here to change the rules by existing inside them differently. And that's why the panic happened. Because half the room realized they couldn't control you. The other half realized they couldn't ignore you. And both outcomes lead to the same conclusion. You're no longer adjustable. You're not malleable. You're not impressionable. You're not available for manipulation. You've crossed that internal line where discomfort no longer scares you. It informs you. So let them keep asking in whispers who taught you this. Let them keep searching for a source they can discredit. Let them keep trying to reverse engineer a mind that was built under conditions they would have folded in. You don't need to answer. Because the truth is already doing the talking. You're calm where others scramble, clear where others cope, still where others react. And the next time a room tightens when you speak, when that familiar panic ripples and someone almost blurts it out again, you'll recognize the moment, instantly. Not as validation, not as victory, but as confirmation. Confirmation that you've outgrown explanation. Confirmation that your presence alone now carries weight. Confirmation that whatever shaped you didn't just teach you how to survive. It taught you how to arrive. And this time, you're not here to blend in. You're here to make people feel the difference and never forget it.
Thank you for watching, family. We do hope this message was helpful and life-changing. Don't forget to join the Alchemicjoker community where we transform pain into power. Stick around for more powerful messages. We love you.